Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the place where we turn massive piles of research into distilled, delicious knowledge. Today, we are taking on a topic that sits right at the intersection of philosophy, ethics, and some really cutting-edge neuroscience. Animal consciousness.
Right.
We're talking about that fundamental quality of being aware. Aware of something outside yourself or something inside yourself. Self-awareness, even.
And it is the ultimate boundary question, isn't it? For centuries, this was almost purely a philosophical debate. How can we really know what it's like inside the mind of a non-human? But our mission for this deep dive is to show you how, really in just the last decade or so, science has not just joined the debate, it's completely moved the goalposts.
The whole consensus has shifted radically.
And the implications are, well, they're enormous.
But the challenge, right out of the gate, it's still philosophical, isn't it? It's this problem of other minds.
Exactly. That's the foundation of all of this. In philosophy, it's the question of how you can be certain that any mind other than your own has a subjective, conscious experience.
With other people, we just sort of assume.
We assume. We use language. We see shared behaviors. We know our brains are built the same way. But with animals, that problem is just exponentially harder.
Because they can't tell us.
They can't tell us what they're feeling in human language. So we're forced to infer everything through these clever proxies, which is always, filled with potential for error.
And historically, it's been pretty convenient to just deny consciousness altogether. It's kind of an ethical shortcut.
A huge one. And you have to look at someone like René Descartes back in the 17th century.
The animal machine guy.
The animal machine guy.
Mm-hmm.
He promoted this mechanistic model. He basically claimed that animals were just complex biological automata.
Like robots made of meat.
Precisely. They looked like they were feeling pain, they looked like they had emotions, but he argued you could explain all of it mechanically. You didn't need a conscious soul or a mind. Only humans had that.
And the ethical gravity of that is just immense.
It is. It gives you permission to treat animals as objects.
Right.
If you can successfully argue an animal isn't conscious, that it doesn't really feel pain or suffer, well, then it follows that its life has no moral value in the way a human life does.
So harming them isn't wrong.
It isn't morally wrong. And this is why these new scientific declarations are so important. They are a direct challenge to centuries of that kind of ethical rationalization.
But the core of the problem, the thing that really crystallized the sheer unknowability of it all, was Thomas Nagel's essay from '74.
Oh. What is it like to be a bat?
Exactly.
It's still so influential. Nagel's argument is beautifully simple, but also really profound. He says, an organism is conscious if and only if there is something that is like to be that organism.
Something it is like for the organism.
Yeah. Yes, and the problem he points out is that we can never, ever get outside of our own human perspective.
You can learn everything about a bat's brain, how echolocation works, the physics of it. You can even try to, hang upside down in a dark room.
But you'll only ever know what it's like for a human to simulate being a bat. You'll never know the subjective, phenomenal experience of navigating the world as a three-dimensional tapestry of sound.
Which is their reality.
It is. And Nagel just forces us to accept that that subjective world might be fundamentally inaccessible. So science has to look for objective markers of subjectivity.
Which brings us to the definitional mess.
The mess, yeah.
Before you can measure it, you have to define it, and defining consciousness seems like trying to nail jelly to a wall.
It is remarkably ambiguous. Our sources point out there's something like 40 different meanings for the term.
40.
Depending on if you're talking about memory or function or awareness. Even as recently as 2004, you had top neuroscientists saying a precise definition was, and I'm quoting here, premature.
Yeah.
They just hadn't mapped the brain enough.
Okay, so if consciousness is too big and messy, we have to break it down into parts we can actually measure. So let's start at the bottom. The most basic requirement.
That would be sentience. This is the minimal definition. It's just the ability to feel, to perceive, to have subjective experiences. It's the raw capacity for an inner life.
So if a creature is sentient, it's not just a robot reacting. There's something going on inside.
Exactly. Yeah. And the specific things going on inside.
The actual feelings.
Those are qualia. That's the fancy philosophical term for the individual instances of subjective experience. Not the ability to feel, but the specific feeling itself. The redness of red, the sting of a burn.
If sentience is the operating system, qualia are the little data packets running on it.
That's a great way to put it. And then at the very top of the pyramid, you have the thing we usually think of.
Self-reflection.
Self-awareness. the capacity to look inward, to recognize yourself as an individual, an I that's separate from the world around you.
This is a lot to juggle. Is there a framework to help organize this?
There is. The late neuroscientist Gerald Edelman gave us a really useful one. He broke it down into two distinct levels of consciousness. He starts with primary consciousness. You can think of this as sensory consciousness. It's simple awareness. It's the ability to take in what you're seeing, what you're hearing, and integrate it with your immediate memory to create an awareness of the right now.
The immediate present?
The immediate present. An animal with primary consciousness knows what's happening in its direct sensory world. We think most animals have this, from your dog to maybe even a foraging ant.
Okay, but I have to jump in there. If it's just about knowing the immediate present, isn't that what a sophisticated AI does? I mean, a self-driving car is aware of its immediate surroundings, it tracks objects, it integrates sensory data. How do we know it's felt in an animal and not just advanced programming?
That is the perfect question. And that is the exact challenge that Edelman's second level tries to address.
Okay.
Secondary consciousness. This is what helps separate true subjective experience from just complex behavior. It's a much higher form. It involves self-reflection, abstract thought, and critically, access to your own personal history and the ability to make plans for the future.
So it's mental time travel. You can reflect on your past and project yourself into the future.
Precisely. This lets you go beyond the limits of that remembered present. Now, in its richest, most linguistic form, it might be unique to humans, but it's clearly present in animals that show advanced problem solving. Great apes, and as we'll see, some birds. The key difference is that secondary consciousness requires an internal model of the self who is doing the awareness.
Right. So philosophy gets stuck on what's it like to be a bat. So scientists have to find ways to measure this stuff with empirical data.
Exactly. We need tools. In humans, we rely on three things: verbal reports, behavior, and looking at the brain neural correlates. With animals, verbal reports are out. So we have to get really inventive with the behavioral tests.
And the most famous and maybe most criticized of those tests is the mirror test?
The mirror test, or the mark test, Gordon Gallup Jr. came up with it in the 70s to try and get its self-recognition.
The method is pretty simple, right?
Very straightforward. You put a mark, some dye or paint, on an animal while it's sedated, somewhere they can't see it on their own body. Then you wake them up, show them a mirror. If they look at their reflection, and then start touching or rubbing the mark on their own body,
then they pass. They recognize that the thing in the mirror is them.
They've made the connection.
And the A-listers who pass are pretty much who you'd expect. The great apes, chimps, orangutans, and then big-brained social animals like elephants, dolphins, killer whales. But the real game changer, the result that turned neuroscience on its head, was the magpie.
Oh, absolutely. The 2008 magpie study was a genuine shock to the system because it just completely blew up the reigning theory at the time.
This neocortex fallacy.
Exactly. The fallacy was this assumption that self-recognition, and really any high-level consciousness, was restricted to mammals with a big layered neocortex.
But birds don't have one of those. Their brains are structured totally differently.
Totally differently. Their intelligence comes from a dense structure called the pallium. And the magpie result proved that the brain parts that mammals and birds inherited from their last common ancestor evolved down two completely separate paths to achieve the exact same complex cognitive feat.
So it proved it's about the function, not the specific structure.
That's the key. It was the first clear, non-mammalian proof that there's more than one way for a brain to produce self-awareness.
And the controversy just keeps going, right? Down the evolutionary tree. What about that fish, the cleaner wrasse?
That is a fantastic example of the limits of the test itself. So this small reef fish, the cleaner wrasse, was the first fish ever reported to pass the mirror test. They put a mark on them, and they saw the fish trying to scrape the mark off on rocks and coral, but only after looking in the mirror.
It seems like it checks all the boxes.
It does, but the criticism came immediately, and it was profound.
From the test's inventor, no less.
Right, Gallup himself argued that this is what cleaner wrasse do. They clean parasites off other fish. So he said maybe the fish just saw what it thought was a parasite on another fish, its reflection, and was just doing its instinctual parasite scraping thing.
So is it recognizing itself or just seeing another fish with a thing on it?
That's the question. Now, the study's authors pushed back. They said the sequence of the behavior mattered. The wrasse would check the mirror, go scrape, then come back and check the mirror again. That pattern suggests they knew the reflection was their own body.
It's still being debated.
It is. But it highlights the biggest flaw of the mirror test.
Hmm.
It is profoundly anthropocentrically visual. It's a test for animals that, like us, rely on sight for identity.
If you're a creature whose world is built on smell, you're gonna fail.
You're going to fail even if you're fundamentally self-aware.
Which brings us to dogs.
Yes, dogs. They fail the mirror test miserably. And yet I don't think anyone who lives with a dog has any doubt that they are conscious beings.
Right. They just don't care what they look like.
They're not visual in that way. Their primary sense is smell, olfaction. So to get around this bias, a study in 2015 came up with the sniff test of self-recognition.
Okay, how does that work?
They gave dogs urine samples. One was their own fresh sample, one was from another dog, and the last one, this is the clever part, was their own sample, but it had been slightly altered with a new scent.
And you just watch how long they sniff each one.
Exactly. Their own fresh urine. They barely sniffed it. They recognized it as me and moved on. The other dog's urine, lots of investigation. But the altered me sample, they spent way more time sniffing that one.
Which suggests they recognized it as their own scent, but also noticed something was different.
It's evidence of self-awareness, but using their primary sense.
Yeah.
And the takeaway for you, the listener, is just so important here. When we see differences between species, it might just be the limits of our tests, not the limits of the animal.
Okay, so that's physical self-recognition. But what about getting inside their heads? How they're feeling? Are they an optimist? Are they a pessimist?
To measure those internal emotional states, those affective states, scientists use a concept called cognitive bias.
The glass half full, glass half empty idea?
That's it, exactly. But applied to animals.
How on earth do you test for optimism in a rat? Or a honeybee?
You train them. You teach an animal, say a rat, that a high-pitched tone means something good is coming, like a food pellet, and a low-pitched tone means something negative, or maybe nothing at all.
So you train them on the two extremes.
You train them on the extremes, then you hit them with an ambiguous cue, a tone that's right in the middle.
And you see what they do.
If the rat is feeling optimistic in a glass half-full state, it will run to the food spot predicting a good outcome. If it's feeling pessimistic or anxious, it will hesitate or avoid it.
That's brilliant. It's a quantifiable, objective measure of a subjective state.
And it works. It's been used successfully on this incredible range of species: rats, dogs, sheep, starlings, even honeybees. And they found that you can influence it. Give rats an enriched, happy environment, they become more optimistic. Isolate them, they become more pessimistic.
So you can directly link their environment to their measurable emotional state.
You can.
Okay, that's emotion. Let's push it one step further. The idea of knowing that you know.
Metacognition. Cognition about cognition. It's the ability to monitor your own certainty, to know when you're sure about something and when you're just guessing. It's fundamental for higher level thinking.
And where have we seen real proof of this in animals?
The best evidence comes from rhesus monkeys and great apes. Researchers gave them tasks where, if they weren't sure of the answer, they could choose to opt out of the trial.
The I don't know button.
The I don't know button. And they found that the harder the task, the more often the animals would choose to opt out and avoid a penalty for guessing wrong. This showed they weren't just guessing. They were actively monitoring their own internal state of knowledge.
And what about, say, rats?
They tried. There were some studies in the mid-2000s that looked promising. But when they dug into the data, it seemed like you could explain the rat's behavior with simpler conditioning.
What's the difference there? I mean, functionally, what's the difference between true metacognition and just complex conditioning?
It's about reflection. With true metacognition, the monkey is thinking, in a sense, I'm not sure about this memory, so I'll hit the odd God button.
Okay.
With a conditioning model, the rat isn't thinking about its memory. It's just learned a rule. When the cue is fuzzy, the I don't know button gives me a small, guaranteed treat, which is a better bet than risking a punishment. It's maximizing its reward based on external cues, not reflecting on its internal doubt.
Which just shows how hard it is to be sure you're measuring what you think you're measuring.
It's incredibly difficult.
And all of this detailed science is what finally led to this huge paradigm shift. Because for so long, we had that neocortex fallacy. People like James Rose in the early 2000s arguing you needed that specific mammalian brain structure to have complex feelings.
That was the absolute conventional wisdom. Rose argued that a fish, for example, might recoil from an injury, but that was just a non-conscious reflex because it didn't have a neocortex. The actual conscious feeling of pain, he said, had to be cortical.
But then neuroscientists started looking for the neural correlates of consciousness, the NCCs, outside of the cortex.
And that was the revolution. The NCC is the minimum brain activity you need for a specific conscious experience. And the old view was that it had to be in the neocortex. But now we have overwhelming evidence that animal consciousness can come from homologous subcortical brain networks.
Homologous meaning structures we share from a common ancestor. Which deep brain structures are we talking about?
We're talking about ancient structures that all vertebrates have. Things of the brainstem, the thalamus, the hypothalamus. For instance, there's a part of the brainstem called the periaqueductal gray, or PEG. It's critical for processing things like pain and fear.
So even if you don't have a cortex or it's built differently, you still have these deep, shared emotional centers.
Exactly. And the convergent evidence is stunning. If you use deep brain stimulation on these subcortical areas in humans, you generate basic emotional states: panic, pleasure, rage. And if you stimulate the exact same homologous areas in other animals, you get the exact same behavioral responses.
So the feeling itself is generated deep in the brain. The cortex might add layers of thought and memory to it, but the raw feeling is subcortical.
That seems to be the case. The feeling itself is ancient.
And all this evidence came together in 2012 with this huge public statement, the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness.
That was the scientific community drawing a line in the sand. A group of the world's leading neuroscientists got together and said, unequivocally, non-human animals, including all mammals and birds, and many other creatures, including octopuses, also possess these neurological substrates for consciousness.
Including birds and octopuses in that first declaration was the really powerful part.
It was. It was an explicit rejection of the idea that you needed a mammalian brain. It confirmed that bird brains, for example, are functionally homologous to ours. They just evolved on a parallel track to achieve the same complex results.
So if Cambridge was the earthquake, then the New York Declaration on Animal Consciousness from 2024 was the global aftershock that basically cemented this new reality.
It was a massive expansion. We're talking over 500 scientists signing on. And they didn't just reaffirm that mammals and birds are conscious. That's now considered settled science. They went way further.
Where did they go?
They stated that there is now a realistic possibility of conscious experience in all vertebrates. That means fish, reptiles, amphibians, and even more radically, in many invertebrates.
So the scientific community is now saying, for these groups, we have enough evidence that we can't ethically ignore the possibility anymore.
That's exactly it. They specifically named cephalopods, like octopuses, decapod crustaceans, so crabs and lobsters, and even insects. Insects, based on growing evidence of complex behavior and pain responses in those groups.
And this leads right back to the ethical point we started with.
It does. The New York Declaration has an explicit ethical mandate. It says when there's a realistic possibility that an animal has conscious experience, it is irresponsible to ignore that possibility in any decision that affects that animal.
So the burden of proof has flipped.
It is completely flipped. We no longer need absolute proof of consciousness to act ethically. The mere possibility now imposes a moral obligation.
Okay, let's dive into some of these non-mammalian minds that are forcing this change. We have to get away from that old idea of the scalinature, the ladder of nature, with us at the top.
That shift is fundamental, and avian intelligence is the best proof of this parallel evolution concept.
So let's start with the corvids, crows, ravens, magpies. They are just shattering all the old assumptions.
They are magnificent. We already know the magpie passed the mirror test. And the reason it can do that without a mammalian cortex is that avian pallium structure we mentioned. It's organized differently into dense clusters instead of layers. But functionally, it's just as powerful. A beautiful case of convergent evolution.
And we got definitive proof of their sensory consciousness just a few years ago.
Yes, that 2020 study on carrion crows. They trained the crows to signal when they saw a flash on a screen. And by monitoring their brains, the scientists found a specific neural response that perfectly correlated with whether the crow perceived the stimulus or not.
So they found a functional marker for subjective perception, a neural correlate of consciousness, but in a bird.
Exactly. Which means either the foundations for conscious perception evolved more than 320 million years ago, before we split from them, or birds evolved it all on their own. Either way, it's not just a mammal thing.
And then there are the gray parrots, where the evidence for that higher-level secondary consciousness is just so strong, mostly thanks to Irene Pepperberg's work with Alex.
Alex is a cornerstone of this field. Pepperberg showed he wasn't just mimicking. He understood abstract concepts: shape, color, number, even relative size. He could identify things based on their absence.
Can you give us a concrete example? Something that shows he wasn't just, following cues.
One of the most famous is the concept of zero or none. He was shown a tray of blocks, all of them blue, and he was asked what color is different, and Alex would say none.
Wow.
He could apply that concept across different categories. If they showed him two identical keys and asked what is different, he'd say none. He got the abstract concept of absence.
That's a level of thinking you really only see in chimps or very young human children.
It is. And it wasn't a one-off. Another parrot, Inkisi, had a vocabulary of over 950 words and would use them creatively. When Jane Goodall came to visit, the parrot looked at her and asked, "Got a chimp?"
That's not a trained phrase.
Not at all. It is a creative connection based on seeing pictures of her work. We've even seen gray parrots collaborate to solve problems and show social preferences for who they want to work with.
Okay, if birds are the parallel evolution argument, let's go to the truly alien minds, invertebrates, specifically octopuses.
Octopuses are just fascinating. Their intelligence is so decentralized. 2/3 of their 500 million neurons are not in their central brain. They're in their arms.
So the arms think for themselves?
Semi-autonomously, yes. An octopus arm can perform incredibly complex actions like navigating a maze, even without direct input from the central brain. They have short and long-term memory, they learn by observation, they can open screw-top jars.
And it's the specific behaviors, the anecdotes, that really suggest an internal world. Things like play and tool use.
Play is a big one. It has no immediate survival function, and we see octopuses in tanks repeatedly dropping toys into a current just so they can catch them again. That suggests curiosity.
But the real kicker is the coconut shell story.
Oh, the veined octopus, yes. Researchers saw them do something incredible, not just using a shell for shelter, but actively collecting discarded coconut shells, carrying them across the seafloor, and then assembling them into a portable shelter when they needed it.
That's not just using a tool, that's planning for a future need.
It's complex tool use that requires foresight and planning. Those are capabilities tied directly to secondary consciousness.
So with all this overwhelming data, the self-aware magpie, the abstract thinking parrot, the coconut-carrying octopus, how do we even start to compare them? How do we get past that simple consciousness ladder?
We need a new map, a multidimensional one. And that's what led to this proposal in 2020 for a multidimensional framework for animal consciousness. It gets rid of that single line, that single continuum.
So instead of asking if an octopus is less conscious than a crow, you look at their different strengths across different axes of awareness.
Exactly. The framework proposes 5 dimensions. First, perceptual richness, how much detail is in their sensory world. A bird with 4 types of color cones scores higher than we do.
Okay.
Second, evaluative richness, the complexity of their emotions. Third is unity. Is their experience integrated into a single perspective? The octopus is a fascinating question here.
Right. Does it have 9 points of view?
Maybe. Fourth is temporality. Do they live in the now, or can they remember the past and plan for the future, like our octopus? And fifth is selfhood, the extent of self-processing, from basic body awareness all the way up to mirror self-recognition.
That feels like a much more honest way to look at it. It lets you compare different types of minds without trying to flatten them onto one human-centric scale.
That's the goal. And it brings us to the main takeaway for you, the learner. The old neocortex-only view is gone. The scientific consensus is that consciousness is widespread. And now our job is to study these different dimensions, accepting that this vast array of non-human species are plausible sentient beings.
Which brings us right back around to where we started, at that philosophical question of function versus feeling. There's that old idea, right? Epiphenomenalism.
Epiphenomenalism.
Yeah.
The idea that consciousness is just a useless byproduct. The philosopher Thomas Henry Huxley compared it to the whistle on a steam locomotive. It makes a noise, but it has no effect on the engine's machinery. The brain does all the work, and the feeling of consciousness just sort of rides along.
But the philosopher William James had a great counter-argument to that, an evolutionary one.
He did. He basically asked, if consciousness does nothing, why would evolution bother to select for it and preserve it for hundreds of millions of years across all these different species?
It must have a survival value. It must do something.
It must be efficacious. It must allow for flexible responses to new situations that a simple reflex can't handle.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to take away from this deep dive. Think about us, about humans. We can learn a complex skill, playing a Beethoven sonata, riding a bike, to the point where it becomes completely automatic. We don't have to consciously think about it at all. So we know that complex adaptive behavior can happen without moment-to-moment conscious oversight.
Right. The behavior is functional, it's automated.
So if the incredible complex behavior we see in all these animals, the octopus with its coconut, the collaborating parrot, already has its own functional survival value, what does William James's point imply for our actions? Does the very existence of that complex survival, honed by millions of years of evolution, already create its own ethical urgency? Regardless of whether we can ever truly answer the question, what is it like to be them?
Perhaps the function is enough to demand our respect, even as we continue the search for the feeling.
We'll leave you with that thought. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
Welcome back to the deep dive, the mission where we take, one of these complex, often misunderstood topics, and we just shred the sources.
And the goal is always to give you the essential, actionable knowledge you need so you can feel truly well-informed.
Today, we are strapping in for an exploration of a molecule that's, well, it's been a staple in sports science for decades.
But its profound importance outside of the gym is it's often ignored. You mention it in public, and people immediately picture a massive bodybuilder.
Or in an energy drink commercial. Right. We are, of course, talking about creatine. And while it might be the reigning king of ergogenic aids, the sources we pulled reveal this molecule with a fascinating 190-year history.
And really surprising implications that go way beyond athletic performance. We're talking cognitive health, women's health, all sorts of things.
Precisely. So at its absolute core, what are we looking at?
Okay, at its simplest, creatine is an organic compound. It's essential to energy metabolism in, well, all vertebrates.
And its main job?
Its fundamental job is to be a fast-acting energy reservoir. It facilitates the immediate recycling of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP.
Which is that universal energy currency of the cell. Everyone's heard of ATP.
Right. And that concept, that recycling of energy, that's the absolute key.
Before we dive into the history, can you give us a quick chemistry snapshot? The sources mention it exists in different forms, neutral and zwitterionic.
Yes, zwitterionic. And all that really means is, think of creatine as a highly charged reactive molecule.
Okay.
So the zwitterionic form is just chemistry's way of saying that the molecule has both a positive charge and a negative charge on different parts of itself at the same time.
So it cancels itself out electrically speaking.
Exactly. It's neutral overall, but it's highly polar, and that makes it incredibly good at rapid chemical interaction, which is exactly what you need for instant energy transfer inside a muscle or, say, a brain cell.
That ATP recycling rule.
Yeah.
That's our focus today. So our deep dive mission is clear. We want to extract the vital nuggets about creatine.
We're cutting through all the noise. We're going to cover how it works, what the hard science actually supports for performance, for brain function, for safety.
And finally, we're going to debunk some of the really persistent myths that are still floating around out there.
To really appreciate the story of creatine, we have to recognize this isn't some product of the 1990 supplement boom. Its history stretches all the way back to 1832.
Nearly 2 centuries ago. That's older than modern chemistry as we know it.
It is. It was first isolated by a brilliant French chemist, Michel Eugène Chevreul, and he wasn't looking for a performance enhancer.
Of course not. What was his goal?
He was simply investigating the chemical composition of animal matter. He isolated this crystalline precipitate from the basified water extract of...
Let me guess. Skeletal muscle.
You guessed it. Skeletal muscle tissue.
And he gave it the perfect name right from its source.
He did. He called it creatine, from the Greek word for meat, kreis. And that history tells you the first essential thing. This compound is intrinsically linked to our biology.
It's as natural as protein itself.
Exactly. But the real scientific momentum, the clues that it could be a supplement, that didn't start until the early 20th century.
Right, about 80 years after its discovery.
That's right. 2 Harvard researchers, Otto Folin and Willy Glover Dennis, did these crucial studies back in 1912.
And what did they find?
Something pretty dramatic. When subjects ingested creatine, their muscle creatine content just shot up. It dramatically increased.
And before that, the assumption must have been that if you ate it, you just excreted it.
Exactly. Scientists weren't sure the body could absorb and retain it so efficiently. The fact that the muscles were able to just grab it and store it hinted at this powerful regulatory mechanism.
So the body was treating it like a precious fuel, not waste.
Precisely. Then, studies in the 1920s solidified this storage idea. And then came the discovery of its energetic partner, phosphocreatine, or PCR.
That was found in 1927.
Right, and that was the chemical turning point. It linked the molecule not just to muscle, but to rapid energy transfer. This is where researchers really started to understand the phosphagen system.
Okay, and then the final piece of that puzzle came in the 1960s with the discovery of the enzyme creatine kinase, or CK.
Yes, CK is the maestro here. It's what uses phosphocreatine to rapidly convert that low-energy ADP back into high-energy ATP. This established the whole system as the critical cellular energy buffer.
So we're shifting from the lab bench to the Olympic Stadium. Because even with all this science, creatine didn't really hit the public consciousness for a while.
Not until after the 1992 Barcelona Summer Olympics.
A classic case of science going mainstream overnight because of some high-profile wins.
It was a massive media wave.
Yeah.
The Times reported that medalists, including Linford Christie, who won gold in the 100 meters.
And Sally Gunnell, who won the 400-meter hurdles gold.
Right, they were both known users of creatine supplements.
And the public, and definitely the market, reacted instantly.
Oh, immediately. Suddenly, everyone wanted this compound. But it's important to remember the timeline here. Commercial supplements for strength didn't even hit the market until 1993.
The year after.
A year after. A company called Experimental and Applied Sciences introduced it as phosphagen. That Olympic connection turned a piece of biochemistry into a multi-million-dollar industry, almost overnight.
It's incredible how fast that happened. Okay, let's bring it back to the metabolic engine.
Okay.
If you're a supplement user, you're bypassing the natural process. But for the average person, where does this stuff actually come from?
This is so important. Creatine is not an essential nutrient. Your body makes it perfectly well on its own.
Right.
It's synthesized primarily from two amino acids,
Yeah.
glycine and arginine. But it's an intensive process that needs a third key ingredient, S-adenosylmethionine.
That's the essential methyl donor, isn't it? It kicks the whole reaction into gear.
It is. It's what catalyzes that final conversion. And this whole specialized process, this machinery, it mainly resides in two organs.
Which always surprises people. You'd assume the muscles do all the work.
But it's actually the liver and the kidneys. The first step happens mostly in the kidney. The second step, the methylation, mostly in the liver. Then once it's made, it's secreted into the bloodstream for transport.
And those destinations are highly specific.
Incredibly specific. 95% of the body's total creatine and phosphocreatine stores are sequestered within skeletal muscle.
95%.
Right.
Just 5% left for the rest of the body. That just screams how important it is for muscle.
It does. And that remaining 5% is distributed to other tissues with incredibly high and immediate energy demands.
Like the brain.
The brain, the blood, and the testes. This concentration is a clear biological signal about its function. It's for tissues that need energy now.
So for the average person, what's the daily need to maintain these stores?
You need between 1 and 3 grams a day. If you have an omnivorous diet, with meat and fish, you naturally get about half of that, maybe a gram a day.
And your body just synthesizes the rest.
The rest is made internally by your liver and kidneys.
Which means vegetarians and vegans who don't get that dietary creatine, they're relying completely on their own synthesis.
That's a crucial point we'll come back to. Now, here's the piece of data that drives the entire supplement market. Your muscle creatine content is typically around 120 millimoles per kilogram of dry muscle.
Okay.
But the sources show that with consistent supplementation, you can push that storage capacity up to 160.
That's a 33% increase. That's not subtle. That is a substantial bump in available quick energy.
That is the fundamental reason for all the performance benefits. It's the difference between having, a standard engine and suddenly having a high-capacity capacitor that can deliver a massive, instant jolt of power.
That capacitor analogy is perfect.
Yeah.
Because the primary fuel, ATP, is so incredibly limited.
It's tiny. The concentration of ATP in your muscle is only about 2 to 5 millimolar.
Which is enough for what? Maybe 1 or 2 heavy reps? A few seconds of an all-out sprint.
That's it. Maybe 5 to 8 seconds. You would hit the wall almost instantly if you only relied on existing ATP. The phosphagen system, buffered by creatine, is an evolutionary necessity for this exact reason.
Let's really detail that rapid regeneration process, because this is the magic of it. During those intense moments, your body can't wait for slower processes like burning glucose.
No time for that. So phosphocreatine, or PCR, acts immediately. It rapidly donates its high-energy phosphate group to an ADP molecule.
The tennessine diphosphate.
Right, and it instantly turns it back into ATP. And the enzyme creatine kinase is the catalyst that makes this happen almost as fast as the ATP is consumed.
It's the highest speed reaction in the cell's energy toolbox.
It is, and because that PCR pool is so much larger than the ATP pool, the muscle can keep going for much longer. It's so efficient, in fact, that it's actually hard to detect changes in ATP levels during intense exercise.
Because it's being replenished the moment it dips. It's like an industrial power grid with a perfect voltage regulator.
That's a great way to put it. And this rapid buffer mechanism is why creatine monohydrate is, without a doubt, the most effective nutritional supplement for improving athletic performance.
The evidence for its ergogenic effects is maybe the most robust in all of sports nutrition, right?
It is. Supplementation significantly increases maximum power and performance in high-intensity, anaerobic, repetitive work.
Okay, let's break down that phrase. High-intensity, anaerobic, repetitive work.
We're talking about activities with short bursts of maximal effort followed by rest.
So weightlifting sets, interval training, jumping.
Exactly. Even the stop-start nature of sports like soccer or basketball. In those scenarios, the performance increase is a really robust 5 to 15%.
And that range is huge. For an athlete, a 15% increase in output, or being able to do an extra rep or two on a hard set, that translates directly into bigger long-term gains.
It does. But here's the crucial distinction that often gets lost in the hype. Creatine has no significant effect on aerobic endurance. Its benefit is tied directly to that phosphagen system, which only dominates in short, high-intensity bursts. If you're training for a 10K or a marathon, creatine won't directly improve your time.
It's a tool for explosive power, specifically. Okay, let's get practical. Dosing. How does someone achieve that full muscle saturation, that 20 to 40% increase?
The sources outline two main strategies. The first, and the most common, is the rapid loading phase.
This is what you always hear about.
Right. This involves taking about 0.3 grams per kilogram of your body weight per day, and you divide that into 4 equal spaced-out doses for about 5 to 7 days.
So for an 80-kilogram person, that's 24 grams total, split into 4 6-gram doses. Why is that spacing so important?
We'll get into the pharmacokinetics, but the short answer is absorption. You want to keep the plasma concentration elevated. This approach rapidly saturates the muscles, and users usually feel a performance boost within a week.
But if someone wants a less aggressive approach, maybe to avoid that initial water weight, there's the slower method.
Yes, you can just take a much lower, constant dose, usually 3 grams per day. You'll achieve the same total muscle saturation.
But the timeline is different.
The timeline is the only difference. It takes about 28 days to fully saturate. So the performance benefits are just delayed until you hit that point.
And once you're saturated, you don't need that high dose anymore. You switch to maintenance.
Exactly. You only need to cover the small amount that degrades daily. So you drop down to a maintenance dose. Early research said 2 to 3 grams, but more modern studies, especially for bigger athletes, suggest 3 to 5 grams per day.
Okay, and a quick tip for maximizing absorption during that loading phase. The carb connection.
Yes, this is a very robust finding. Consuming carbohydrates along with your creatine significantly augments its accumulation in the muscle.
And that's because of the insulin spike.
Exactly. Insulin acts as a sort of cellular shuttle, helping to drive the creatine into the muscle cells and maximizing the uptake.
That's why you see it packaged with sugar, or why people say to mix it with juice. It's an efficiency play.
Purely to speed up that saturation.
Now, something fascinating. For a compound this well-researched, it's surprising how much we don't know about its clinical parameters.
It is truly counterintuitive. We have studied the pharmacology, what creatine does, to death. But there's this weird lack of established pharmacokinetic parameters.
So we don't have clear data on its clearance rate, volume of distribution, things like that.
Not in a systematic way for clinical dosing. We mostly rely on the outcome studies, measuring the muscle saturation. But we do have one very specific detail about its lifespan in the bloodstream.
And what's that?
It has a very short elimination half-life. It averages just under 3 hours.
3 hours, that's quick. Yeah. And that explains exactly why the loading phase requires those 4 spaced-out doses.
Precisely. If you took one big dose in the morning, the plasma concentration would drop off by lunchtime. Maintaining those elevated levels is key, especially if you're thinking about continuous brain benefit, which is where we're going next.
That's a perfect segue. We're moving beyond muscle to that 5% of creatine stored in the brain. The research here suggests beneficial effects, but the evidence is it's a bit tricky to interpret.
It is tricky, mainly because the benefit seems to be context-dependent. The key finding from the data is that the greatest effect on cognitive function seems to be in individuals whose brains are already under some form of stress.
So just like with muscle, if the muscle is fresh, the gains are marginal, but if it's stressed by high-intensity work, the benefits are huge. Same thing for the brain.
Absolutely. When the brain is strained from sleep deprivation, mental overload, stress, that creatine energy buffer becomes critically valuable. It helps stabilize the neural energy supply.
And we have some pretty compelling recent data on this stress theory.
We do. A 2023 meta-analysis suggested it improved memory performance, particularly for older adults. But maybe the most illustrative finding was a 2024 trial on sleep-deprived subjects.
What did that one find?
It found that a single large dose of 0.35 grams per kilogram of body mass was enough to partially restore cognitive performance after that lack of sleep.
Wait a minute. If these trials, especially one on sleep deprivation, show a clear physiological restoration, why are regulatory bodies still hesitant? I saw that skeptical note from the EFSA.
That's a great point. It's the tension between an observed effect and a full mechanistic understanding. The 2024 EFSA opinion concluded that they can't yet establish a firm cause and effect relationship.
What's the sticking point? What mechanism are they missing?
They cite insufficient evidence on the underlying biochemical mechanisms. We see it works under stress, but the full pathway, how it specifically regulates complex processes like memory formation at a molecular level, that's not completely mapped out.
Ah, okay. So it's scientific caution. They want to know the how before they make a broad claim.
Exactly. It's scientific caution at its best.
Fair enough. Okay, moving from general cognition to neurological and muscular diseases. The results here are, well, they're pretty varied.
Definitely mixed. It underscores that creatine is a tool, not a cure-all. For some conditions, the results are quite positive. A meta-analysis on muscular dystrophies showed it increased muscle strength and potentially improved functional performance.
Which links back perfectly to its core function, giving us struggling muscle and energy buffer.
Precisely. You're upgrading a failing energy capacitor. But for other conditions, the effects are limited or even negative. In metabolic myopathies, for example, it doesn't seem to improve strength.
And for McArdle disease, it can actually be harmful.
Yes. For those with McArdle disease, high doses can impair daily living and increase muscle pain.
Why the reversal?
Well, McArdle disease involves a deficiency in glycogen breakdown, so the muscle is already energy compromised. If you flood that system with high doses of creatine, the metabolic strain of transporting it might just be too much for an already failing system.
And the research confirms it's ineffective for ALS.
That's correct. And while research is ongoing for its role in neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and Huntington's,
Because of the mitochondrial connection.
right, the theory is sound. But as of a 2014 review, the evidence wasn't strong enough for treatment decisions in Parkinson's. And for Huntington's, we're still waiting on systematic reviews.
Let's shift gears completely now to a critical but often overlooked area, women's health and pregnancy. This is where some of the most compelling new research is.
This is genuinely exciting data. Recent findings suggest a significant protective effect for mothers and infants. Women consuming more than 13 milligrams of creatine per kilogram of body mass daily showed a lower risk of obstetric conditions.
A lower risk. What's the proposed physiological benefit during pregnancy?
It's multifaceted. First, it supports energy production and stabilizes maternal creatine levels. Second, it's a powerful antioxidant. But the most critical finding relates to reducing the risk of preterm birth and offering protection against perinatal brain injury.
Protection against brain injury sounds huge. How does that work?
It allows for faster cellular recovery after a hypoxic event, a temporary lack of oxygen, which can happen during a complicated birth.
So the cell has a backup power source.
It does. It can quickly restore ATP levels and maintain its integrity, which mitigates damage. It basically provides a crucial energy safety net during a high-risk event.
Before we move on to safety, we have to tackle the elephant in the locker room, the myth that creatine raises testosterone or causes balding.
Yes, this needs to be put to rest. A very strong 2021 systematic review was conclusive. The current body of evidence does not indicate that creatine supplementation increases total testosterone, free testosterone, or DHT.
And DHT is the hormone linked to male pattern baldness?
Correct. And crucially, it does not cause hair loss or baldness. The performance gains are purely metabolic, not hormonal.
Okay, now for the most critical section for any listener, safety and quality. Let's start with the immediate side effects everyone talks about.
The one well-documented undisputed side effect is initial weight gain. In the first week of a loading phase, users will gain weight, often 1 to 3 kilograms.
And this is an osmotic effect. Water follows the creatine.
Exactly. As the muscle pulls in more creatine, it must also pull in water to maintain balance. The cell swells.
But the sources suggest this is a short-term cosmetic effect, right?
That's the important distinction. New research shows that while this initial water weight is common, long-term use doesn't really affect your total body water relative to muscle mass. The body adjusts.
The other two big myths that need to be dispelled are muscle cramps and dehydration.
Yes, these concerns have been systematically discredited by multiple reviews going back to 2008 and 2009. The evidence just doesn't support those anxieties. Creatine is not detrimental to your hydration or heat regulation.
Now, for the most sensitive concern, the one that worries doctors, renal function. Does it damage the kidneys?
This is based on a fundamental misunderstanding. Creatine's breakdown product is creatinine, which is excreted by the kidneys.
And doctors use creatinine levels as a marker for kidney function.
Right, so when you supplement creatine, you naturally elevate the amount of creatinine in your blood. This often causes a false positive reading for poor kidney function.
So we need high-quality systemic reviews to sort this out.
And we have them. A crucial 2019 systematic review investigated standard dosing from 4 to 20 grams a day across a wide array of populations: athletes, diabetics, postmenopausal women.
And the definitive finding.
The finding was clear and highly reassuring. While supplementation did result in slightly elevated creatinine levels, which is expected, those levels stayed well within normal, healthy limits.
And the conclusion.
The review concluded with absolute certainty that creatine supplementation in healthy populations at recommended doses did not induce renal damage.
That is the ultimate reassurance, and is backed by authoritative bodies.
It is. The International Society of Sports Nutrition states that long-term use, even up to 5 years, is considered safe in healthy populations, from infants to the elderly to athletes. The science is settled on this point.
Okay, so the pure molecule is stellar. But we have to talk about quality control and contamination. This is where the informed consumer needs to pay attention.
This is maybe the most actionable piece of knowledge today. The supplement industry is loosely regulated, and a critical 2011 survey of 33 commercial creatine supplements in Italy highlighted a major risk.
What did that survey find?
It found that over 50% of the tested supplements exceeded the European Food Safety Authority's recommendations for at least one contaminant. You're not always buying pure creatine.
Let's break down those contaminants. What were the most concerning ones?
Ironically, the most prevalent was creatinine, the breakdown product. This was in 44% of the samples, meaning the product was already degrading or was manufactured poorly.
A sign of a stale or sloppy product. What about the really concerning synthetic impurities?
This is where quality control is critical. About 15% of the samples had detectable levels of dihydro-1,3-1,5-triazine or high concentrations of disandiamide.
Those sound like toxic industrial byproducts.
They are. Disandiamide is a direct byproduct of cheap creatine synthesis. Its presence suggests the manufacturer did not sufficiently purify the final product.
It's evidence of cheap, non-rigorous manufacturing.
Exactly. While heavy metal contamination was low, these other compounds are why you must choose high-quality products with third-party testing. The risk isn't from the molecule itself, but from the process.
Finally, let's circle back to diet. Omnivores get about 1 gram a day. How does this benefit those on plant-based diets?
It's a huge benefit. Because creatine supplements are produced using non-animal derived materials, they're completely suitable for vegans and vegetarians.
And those groups naturally have lower muscle creatine levels.
Exactly, because they lack the daily dietary supply from meat. So they actually stand to benefit the most from supplementation. It allows them to instantly boost their stores up to that maximum level, equalizing the playing field for high-intensity training.
So what does this all mean for you? We've taken creatine from its obscure 1832 isolation all the way to the 1992 Olympic spotlight.
We've established its role as the body's fastest energy capacitor, detailed the science behind dosing, and synthesized the evidence showing its rock-solid safety record.
And its emerging cognitive benefits, especially when your brain is under stress.
The takeaway is simple. Creatine is perhaps the most well-researched, scientifically supported, and safe ergogistic aid out there. But context matters.
It's not magic.
It's not magic. It's targeted toward rapid, high-intensity work and providing crucial energetic resilience for your high-demand tissues. It's pure, reliable biochemistry.
Now, for a final provocative thought, something that connects creatine to everyday life far outside the gym. And it involves cooking, specifically grilled meat.
Creatine plays this unexpected critical role in food chemistry. When you mix creatine with protein and sugar and cook it at high temperatures above 148 Celsius, which is easy to hit on a grill, the reaction produces carcinogenic compounds.
Heterocyclic amines, or HCAs.
That's them. This reaction creates that dark, crusty char we associate with grilled flavor.
It's the creatine itself reacting.
Yes, the creatine content of the muscle tissue reacting with other elements. Food scientists actually use creatine content as an indicator of meat quality because its presence is so integral to forming these HCAs during cooking.
So it's a compound you interact with almost daily, whether you supplement or not.
Influencing everything from your cellular energy to the quality and safety of your dinner.
A compelling reminder that creatine is far more than just gym powder. It's a fundamental part of our biology. We encourage you to explore the wider implications of its role in health. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive. We often talk about figures who come to power through, birthright or some huge popular movement. But today we're looking at a man who basically engineered his own destiny. We're talking about someone who clawed his way to the top through sheer, focused ambition.
And ruthlessness. Can't forget that part.
Definitely. We are diving into the life and legacy of Muhammad Ali Pasha, the Ottoman Albanian governor who, really against all odds, became the founder of modern Egypt.
Yeah.
And his dynasty. It lasted for almost 150 years.
Yeah, our mission today is really to unpack the sources and figure out the blueprint for his rise. I mean, how does a commander who only sets foot in Egypt in 1801 manage to build this enormous modern military?
Right.
Completely revolutionize the economy and set himself up as the de facto ruler of a huge empire.
An empire that, at its peak around 1840, was just massive. We're talking Sudan, the Arabian Peninsula, the Levant, Crete, even parts of Greece.
It's an incredible achievement, especially when you remember he was technically still a governor for the Ottoman Sultan.
He didn't just take over. He tore the whole thing down and rebuilt it from the ground up. The economy, industry, society, everything.
It was a meticulous, calculated effort. The sources really show that. He takes this chaotic, weak Ottoman province in 1805, and by 1840, Cairo isn't just some provincial backwater.
No, it's the center of a regional power that's genuinely threatening Constantinople itself.
Exactly, and that ambition really paid off. He got what he wanted. Hereditary rule for his family. That dynasty controlled Egypt right up until the 1952 revolution.
Okay, so let's unpack this. How did a military commander from Albania do it? How did he consolidate power and completely redesign a country? Such an unlikely story of military genius, but also just a phenomenal level of political ruthlessness.
Well, to get the ruthlessness, you have to start with his unlikely origins. Muhammad Ali was born in 1769 in Kavala, which today is in Greece, but was then part of Ottoman Rumelia.
And his family, they were ethnic Albanians.
That's right. His father, Ibrahim Aga, was a merchant tobacco and shipping, but he also held a local rank as an Ottoman commander.
So he wasn't born into the top tier of the aristocracy, but he had connections to both business and the military.
Yeah.
That's a useful combination.
It is a very practical background. After his father died, his uncle took him in. And Ali, while he showed a real talent for administration early on, collecting taxes for his uncle, that's how he earned the rank of Bulakbashi.
So a local commander and tax guy.
Yeah. And he used that status to marry his wealthy cousin. All of this, it positioned him perfectly for the moment the world turned upside down.
And that moment was Napoleon Bonaparte invading Egypt.
That's the one. He didn't go to Egypt to be a governor. He went there as a soldier.
For combat, yeah.
Right. In 1801, he arrives as a second commander with an Albanian contingent. Their mission, on paper, was to help the Ottomans kick out the French after Napoleon had to pull back.
But Napoleon's withdrawal didn't exactly bring peace and quiet, did it?
Not at all. It created a massive power vacuum. It was this three-way free-for-all. You had the Ottoman forces, the old Mamluk elites, and the remnants of the French collaborators.
And the Mamluks? They had been the ruling class in Egypt for centuries.
For 600 years, yeah. They were weakened, but they were not gone. In this chaos, from about 1801 to 1805, this is where Muhammad Ali's political genius really shines.
He used his Albanian troops as a political tool.
As a lever, exactly. He wasn't loyal to the Ottomans, he wasn't loyal to the Mamluks, he was loyal to himself. He would align with one side then the other, always improving his own position.
And while he was doing that, he was also winning over the locals.
A master pragmatist. He saw that the people hated the old Ottoman administration, so he steps in, creates order, fights corruption, and he starts to build support among prominent Egyptians.
Who were his key allies on the Egyptian side?
The ulama, the religious scholars, especially from the Al-Azhar Mosque, were crucial, and a very important Egyptian leader named Umar Makram. This coalition, they become his political base.
So by 1805, they'd had enough of the official Ottoman governor.
They'd had enough. And they do something pretty much unheard of. They go to the Ottoman Sultan and demand that he replace his own appointed governor with Muhammad Ali.
And they had the backing of the public.
They did. The street was behind them. The Sultan in Constantinople was stuck. He couldn't risk a full-blown civil war in Egypt, so he caved. Ali was named Wali, or governor, and given the title of Pasha.
So he was appointed by popular demand, not just by the Sultan's decree. That's a huge shift in power.
It's revolutionary. But even with popular support, he still had one massive problem.
The Mamluks.
The Mamluks. 600 years of power doesn't just disappear. Ali knew they were the single greatest threat to his role. As long as they existed, he wasn't safe.
He couldn't just fight them on the battlefield.
No, he knew he had to eliminate their leadership entirely. There could be no half measures.
And this is where things get really dark. The massacre of the Mamluks in 1811.
It was an act of pure political theater and mass murder. Ali throws this huge party at the Cairo Citadel on March 1st, 1811. The official reason was to celebrate his son, Tusun Pasha, who was about to lead an army to Arabia.
The ultimate false pretext.
A perfect one. The Mamluk leaders, maybe they thought Ali needed them to keep things stable while his son was gone, so they accepted the invitation.
Big mistake.
The biggest. As they were leaving the citadel, riding through this narrow, walled-in passage, they were trapped. Ali's troops, hidden on the walls above, just opened fire.
It must have been absolute carnage. There's no escape.
A perfect kill box. The sources differ on the exact numbers, but somewhere around 500 Mamluk leaders and their retainers were killed that day. This wasn't just an assassination, it was the decapitation of an entire ruling class.
And the purge didn't stop at the citadel gates.
No. Once the leadership was gone, Ali sent his army out across Egypt. Their orders were to hunt down and eliminate any remaining Mamluk forces and seize all their property.
That was the moment. He went from being a governor to being an absolute ruler.
It was. The obstacle was gone. And it sent a terrifying message to everyone else, the ulama, the merchants, that Muhammad Ali's will was now law. He had a clean slate to start building his own empire.
So if the end goal is a personal dynasty, the first step has to be money. He needed an economy that could fund a massive, modern army.
And his economic reforms were just as ruthless as his political ones. The foundation was centralization. He basically nationalized all the agricultural land in Egypt.
How did he manage that? Did he just declare it?
He was clever about it. He used the existing Ottoman system, the iltizam system, against itself.
Right, that was the tax farming system where local elites would collect taxes for the state.
Exactly. The tax farmers, or multazims, were mostly Mamluks. So Ali just jacked up the taxes they owed the state to an impossible level.
So they couldn't pay.
They couldn't pay, and when they defaulted, Ali, citing Ottoman law, legally confiscated their properties.
Wow, so he didn't have to fight them for the land. He just bankrupted them using the system they were part of.
That's the genius of it. It was technically legal, but it was confiscation by design. Suddenly, the state, meaning him, owned almost all the productive land in Egypt.
And that leads right into the state monopoly.
Yes. Once he owned the land, he decreed that all farmers had to sell all of their crops directly to the state at a fixed price. Then, the state would turn around and sell those goods on the world market for a massive profit.
But he controlled the entire supply chain.
The whole thing. And it worked incredibly well because of one specific crop, long staple cotton. There was huge demand for it in Europe's textile mills. That cotton money funded everything else.
He also went after other sources of wealth, like the WAC endowments.
The WAF, these religious and charitable endowments, were traditionally tax-free and controlled by the ulama. By taxing them, he did two things. He got more money, and he weakened the power of the religious establishment that might have opposed his modernizing plans.
It's all incredibly calculated. And this whole economic machine, it all served one purpose, right?
One purpose: building the military. The industrialization was all about military self-sufficiency. He had factories in Cairo churning out 1,600 muskets a month, casting cannons.
He didn't want to rely on European arms dealers.
Never. And he needed a navy. So he built a massive shipyard in Alexandria. By the 1830s, he had 9 huge 100-gun warships. For a time, Egypt was a real naval power in the Mediterranean.
How did he pay for all this? The factories, the dams, the infrastructure?
He used a system of concessions. He'd bring in European companies to build the projects, and in return, they'd get a share of the revenue. It was a way to get European money and expertise without giving up control.
This all sounds like incredible progress, but we have to talk about the human cost. The sources are very clear. This was built on the backs of the Egyptian peasants.
Absolutely. The reliance on corvée, or forced peasant labor, was massive and brutal. Peasants were ripped from their villages to work in the factories, dig the canals, and most importantly, to fill the ranks of his army.
The conscription was especially brutal, wasn't it?
It was. The draft was so feared that people would do anything to escape it. Many fled their villages, some going as far as Syria.
And the stories of self-maiming are just horrific.
They are. It tells you everything you need to know about how desperate people were. Men would blind one of their eyes, sometimes with rat poison, or they would cut off the index finger of their right hand.
The trigger finger, so they couldn't fire a rifle.
Exactly. It was a direct response to the demands of this new, modern army he was building, an army of unwilling soldiers.
So how do you control an army like that? An army of men who literally mutilated themselves to avoid serving?
With incredible systematic discipline. New recruits were totally isolated. They were put in barracks under constant watch, unpredictable roll calls, corporal punishment. The whip was common.
And the bureaucracy played a role in this control, too.
A huge role. This is where you see the state machinery directly serving the military. They created detailed military codes. Every soldier was given a number that tracked him. It was all about surveillance and preventing desertion.
He wasn't just building an army. He was building a system to reprogram people into being soldiers.
That's a good way to put it. And that need for modernization went beyond the barracks. It led, surprisingly, to a cultural awakening.
The Nahda, the Arabic Renaissance. How is that connected to military reform?
It's a direct connection. To run this new military and bureaucracy, he needed trained people. But all the manuals, the engineering texts, the military tactics, they were all in European languages.
So he needed translators.
He needed a whole class of educated Egyptians. So he started sending these educational missions promising students to Europe, especially France. Their job was to learn French, study modern science, and come back to translate everything into Arabic.
So the great Arab literary renaissance was sparked by the need to translate military textbooks.
That's the origin. And to print all these new translations, he established the Bulaq Press around 1821, the first indigenous printing press in the Arab world. It was a tool of the state, printing the official gazette and these crucial French texts.
Now, one of the most surprising reforms, and it seems so disconnected from everything else, is the School of Medicine for Women, the Hakimas.
It seems disconnected, but it's a perfect example of how military logic drove everything. In 1832, he allowed a French doctor, Claude Bay, to set up a medical school for women.
Why women specifically? Why was that so important for his army?
2 main reasons. First, culture and law. At the time, male doctors couldn't treat female patients. So if you want to improve the health of the general population, which is where your future soldiers come from, you need female doctors to treat the women and children.
Okay, that makes sense. And the second reason?
Public health threats to the army. High childhood mortality from things like smallpox was shrinking the pool of future conscripts, and venereal diseases were rampant, weakening his active soldiers. He needed a public health corps to tackle these problems.
So the Hakimas, the doctoresses, were a strategic investment in military manpower.
Precisely. Historians argue the main goal was military. By vaccinating children, he was literally growing his future army. And treating diseases among the civilian population kept his current army healthy.
But getting women into a medical school must have been controversial.
Incredibly difficult. The culture was strongly against it, so the first students weren't from respectable families. They had to recruit young slave girls and orphans.
Another example of the state using vulnerable people to achieve its goals.
Yes, but for those women who graduated, it was a path to incredible social mobility. They got a salary, housing, a government-arranged marriage, and the rank of second lieutenant.
And their duties were vital.
Absolutely. They were running vaccination campaigns, treating hundreds of children a month. They were also doing forensic examinations for legal cases. They were a key part of the modern state infrastructure.
So every reform, no matter how progressive it looks on the surface, ties back to building a state that could project military power.
That's the core of it. The internal machine was all about maximizing military capacity. And once that machine was built, he turned it outward.
Right, let's get to the campaigns. The first one was actually on behalf of the Sultan, the Wahhabi War.
It was. By 1811, the House of Saud had captured the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. The Ottoman Sultan was busy elsewhere, so he outsourced the problem to his most capable vassal, Muhammad Ali.
So Ali sends his son to Pasha.
He does, and after a tough start, they retake the holy cities. But to finish the job, he needs his other son, the real military genius of the family, Ibrahim Pasha.
Ibrahim seems to be the one actually winning all these battles.
Ibrahim was the hammer. He leads a 2-year campaign, crushes the Saudi forces, and sends their leader to Constantinople to be executed. A huge victory for Ali's prestige.
But as soon as that's done, he immediately launches his own war, one the Sultan didn't ask for, the conquest of Sudan.
And that's the pivot. The Sudan campaign, starting in 1820, was all for him. He wanted 3 things: gold, territory, and most importantly, slaves for his army.
Human capital to fuel the war machine?
Exactly. The Egyptian conscripts were dying from disease and deserting, so he needed a new source of soldiers. His army marches south, defeats the local forces, and starts incorporating captured Sudanese men into new regiments called the Jihadiyya.
The historical memory of that conquest in Sudan is not a positive one.
No, it's remembered as brutal and extractive.
Next up is the Greek disaster. He's back to fighting for the Sultan, and it costs him dearly.
It really does. The Greek rebellion breaks out in 1821, and the Sultan is desperate. He offers Ali the island of Crete if he'll help suppress it. Ali agrees and sends Ibrahim with a massive force.
And Ibrahim is, once again, very successful on the ground. Maybe too successful.
Way too successful. The European powers, Britain, France, Russia, get nervous. They see this ambitious Egyptian empire expanding into the Mediterranean, and they don't like it.
Oh, they intervene.
They do. In 1827, at the Battle of Navarino, a combined European fleet completely annihilates the entire Egyptian navy.
His whole fleet, the one he spent a decade and a fortune building in Alexandria, gone.
Gone. In one afternoon, it was a crushing blow. He lost the ships, the trained sailors, everything. All that investment in self-sufficiency up in smoke.
And that loss is what pushes him into his final, most audacious move, declaring war on the Sultan himself.
Yes. The Sultan refuses to give him Syria as compensation for his lost fleet, so Ali decides, fine, if you won't pay me, I'll just take it.
Why was Syria so important to him?
It was everything. It was a strategic buffer against the Ottomans, it had valuable resources, and controlling the Levant coast would make him the undisputed power in the region.
So in 1831, he invades.
He does, and Ibrahim Pasha, once again, is unstoppable. He takes Acre after a long siege, marches north, and at the Battle of Konya, he completely shatters the main Ottoman army.
Leaving the road to Constantinople wide open.
Wide open. And this is the moment the European powers have a full-blown panic. This isn't a regional conflict anymore. This is a threat to the entire Ottoman Empire.
The whole balance of power in Europe is at stake.
Exactly. So they step in. The result is the Convention of Carthage in 1833. Ali doesn't get independence, but he gets to keep Crete, the Hejaz, and all of Syria. It's a massive win, but it's not enough for him.
He still wants to be his own man, completely free of the Sultan.
And that tension leads to a second war in 1839, and it's the same story. Ibrahim destroys another Ottoman army at the Battle of Nizib. And then, to top it all off, the entire Ottoman navy defects and sails to Alexandria to join Muhammad Ali.
The Sultan is left with literally nothing.
Militarily bankrupt. This triggers the Oriental Crisis of 1840. Europe has to decide what to do about this man who has become too powerful.
And Britain especially decides he has to be stopped. Why?
For Britain, it was about 2 things. First, they didn't want a strong, independent Arab empire controlling their route to India. Second, they were afraid that if the Ottoman Empire collapsed, their rival, Russia, would swoop in and grab the pieces. They preferred a weak, pliable Ottoman Empire to a strong Egyptian one.
So they chose the devil they knew.
They did. Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia signed the Convention of London. They give Ali an ultimatum. Give up all your claims to the Levant, and we'll grant you and your family hereditary rule over Egypt and Sudan.
But if he refuses?
If he refuses, the offer gets worse, and eventually they'll just depose him. He hesitates, hoping his allies in France will back him up.
But they don't.
They don't, and his gamble fails. The British Navy blockades the Nile, and a joint British-Austrian fleet bombards Acre. He sees the writing on the wall.
He has no choice.
No choice at all. He capitulates, he gives up Syria, Crete, and the Hejaz. He has to slash his army down to just 18,000 men. He loses the empire he built.
But he gets a one thing he wanted most of all.
The ultimate prize. Hereditary rule. His family's right to rule Egypt and Sudan is now guaranteed by the great powers of Europe. It was an unprecedented status for an Ottoman governor. It was the birth of modern, independent Egypt.
So after he achieves that, you'd think it would be a golden age. But the sources say things went downhill fast.
They did. The final years were marked by decay, both for him personally and for the state. His mind started to go after 1843. Maybe senility, maybe a side effect of old medicine, but he became paranoid and unstable.
And his economic system was dismantled?
It was. As part of the peace deal, he was forced to accept European free trade agreements. That meant he had to end his state monopolies.
Which were the foundation of his entire economy.
The entire thing. Suddenly, cheap British manufactured goods flooded the market. His young industries, which had been protected by tariffs, just collapsed.
And Egypt plunged into debt.
A massive financial crisis. By 1844, the debt was enormous. His economic powerhouse was broken.
And by 1848, he was just too ill to rule.
Yes. His son Ibrahim took over, but he was also sick and died within months. Muhammad Ali himself died a year later, in August 1849. He was buried in the great mosque he built in the citadel.
But his funeral wasn't a huge state affair.
No, his successor, his nephew Abbas, despised him. The funeral was a low-key, almost miserable affair. There was no official mourning.
But what did the common people think?
That's the fascinating part. The British consul at the time wrote that, despite his harshness, the people felt a real attachment and veneration for him. The older generation remembered the chaos before he came to power. They felt that the prosperity of Egypt had died with him.
Which brings us to the big debate over his legacy. Is he the founder of modern Egypt, or was he just another foreign conqueror?
The father of modern Egypt view is the one you hear most often, and you can see why. He broke Ottoman power, he built the institutions of a modern state, and he secured his dynasty's rule.
But the other side of the argument is pretty compelling, too.
It is. It points out that he was Albanian. The language of his court was Ottoman Turkish, not Arabic, and he exploited Egyptian labor and resources for his own personal ambition, not for some idea of an Egyptian nation. In that view, he's just the most successful in a long line of foreign rulers.
And this debate became a political football in 20th century Egypt.
Oh, absolutely. The later monarchs, his descendants, tried to paint him as this great benevolent nationalist. But then the revolutionaries who overthrew them, like Nasser, had a much more critical take. They acknowledged him as the founder of the modern state, but they slammed him for his monarchical ambition and his total disregard for the suffering of the common people.
When you look back at it all, that focus on the military is just relentless. The state monopoly, the educational missions, even the women's medical school. It was all about building an army that could challenge an empire.
He understood that in the 19th century, military power was impossible without a modern, centralized, educated state, and that required absolute economic control. It was a complete military-industrial complex before that term even existed.
Which leaves us with a really important question for you to think about. If every one of Muhammad Ali's lasting foundational reforms, the bureaucracy, public health, education, if all of it was just a tool to build an army for his own personal ambition, was the creation of modern Egypt just an accident? A byproduct of one man's relentless pursuit of power?
That's the question at the very heart of his legacy. He forged the state, there's no doubt about that. But whether the ends justified the means and who those ends really served, that's the part we're still debating.
Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.